Hi, welcome to my Explainer series in digital media. Today we tackle iROAS, mROI, and CMAM, which is so many acronyms I couldn't even get through this recording the first time without laughing and breaking down. It's a lot of metrics, but it's important to understand the details because if you don't, you might think that you are spending your advertising budget in a way that is helping your business. In fact, you are hurting your business. So before we define iROAS, we have to start with what is ROAS. It's simply return on ad spend. What does that mean? The definition of return on ad spend is the revenue from advertising divided by the cost of advertising for a given budget. I'm going to use a fictional advertiser, James Newco, who just starts out and starts spending $1,000 on advertising as an example. They look at their sales for the first month and they got $2,000 in sales from their $1,000 of advertising budget. If it's a new business, you might expect that all of those sales are a direct response of the advertising dollars that were spent. And so then the ROAS calculation is simply taking the revenue, the $2,000, over the cost of the advertising, the $1,000, and this gives a ROAS of 2. This is a simple interpretation that they got twice as much revenue as they spent on advertising. This would often be considered a low ROAS. Different industries have different rules of thumb, but in many industries, a ROAS of 4 is viewed as a watermark that needs to be achieved, and in others, you might need to achieve as high as a ROAS of 10. So let's talk about why ROAS is a much maligned metric. Part of it is simply the misuse of ROAS over time. Because it has been hard to measure the sales growth from marketing and advertising efforts, many marketers have simply used ROAS as shorthand for the observed revenue or the total revenue that the business is bringing in. And as a result, we now have a new term, iROAS, where I stands for incremental, which makes it more clear that we're looking at the incremental sales from the marketing efforts. In our example, where the business is new, the total revenue and the new revenue are the same, but in practice, they usually aren't. And so let's continue our example. I gave the example of the business that didn't expect to do any sales if they didn't advertise. However, for most businesses, they expect that they are going to get some volume of sales even if they don't advertise. That might be from returning customers, or in the case of an online business, customers that just stumble upon the product without advertising and then decide that they want it. So continuing our fictional business, let's assume that they're going to do $1,000 of sale even if they don't advertise, essentially baseline revenue. They still go ahead and they advertise and they spend $1,000. And at the end of the second month, their revenue is $2,000. So the incremental revenue through advertising is $1,000, which means that their incremental iROAS is 1,000 divided by 1,000 equals 1. The reason this is significant is it means that there was effectively no incremental benefit from spending that $1,000 on advertising. It was a wash. If the iROAS is under 1, it means that your advertising budget is literally hurting you. The incremental benefit is less than the incremental cost. And again, just to hammer the point, strictly speaking, ROAS should be calculating exactly the same number, but because historically ROAS has been abused and marketers might not have stripped out the baseline revenue, it's possible that they may not have even known what that is. So let's talk about a related term to iROAS, which is mROI, the marketing return on investment. It's extremely similar to ROAS, but we subtract out the marketing cost of advertising from revenue. It is simply the sales growth minus the advertising all over the advertising dollars. And in our fictitious example, this gives an mROI of 0. And this highlights the fact that there is no incremental value from our spend. In fact, it is worse than a wash for reasons that we'll now get into as we start to incorporate the profitability of the underlying business. Continuing our example, our startup advertiser is spending $1,000 to sell $1,000 worth of goods. But in practice, most businesses have a cost of goods associated with them. So let's say that our fictitious business, that it costs $800 worth to make the physical product to generate the $1,000 worth of sales. This means that the gross profit is $1,000 less $800, which is $200. We can also call this the gross margin. The gross margin is simply the gross profit over the sales, and in this case it's 20%. Now, again, our business is deciding to spend $1,000 on advertising, generating $1,000 of sales, but if we're incurring $800 of additional costs, that means that we are actually spending $1,000 to only generate $200 worth of gross profit, and that will surely drive the business into the ground very quickly. So I've pointed out all of the problems with iROAS and mROI, and in particular that they don't account for profitability. So what should you be using? The simplest thing is to say that you need to ensure that you look at the contribution margin after marketing. In our example, that is essentially the gross margin less the cost of advertising. And even though the term is used a lot in marketing and it can be a little bit ambiguous, so I'm going to put an I in front to make sure that we focus on incremental and make it clear that we're talking about the incremental profit from the advertising spend. So CMAM, the incremental contribution margin after marketing, which is essentially the incremental sales less the variable costs, less the marketing costs. Again, it's a mouthful, but this makes you look at your incremental advertising budget. Is it driving incremental profitability? If you want to look at marketing efficiency, you would now divide this by the marketing spend. I fully recognize that this isn't easy. It's complicated even in these toy examples that I've created. But at the end of the day, it's the only way to truly judge whether your advertising budgets are driving the desired outcome. Thanks for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe if you want to get more of this content, particularly related to how to make more money through your digital advertising assets. Thanks.